Okay. Hello and good afternoon, everybody. I've got quite a few people joining at the moment. I think we've got an hour today, so we're going to kick off promptly, so we get the session and everything we need to do. So welcome to this joint event of CICES and ICE today. I'm Bernice Cowton. I'm the Yorkshire Regional Chair for CICES. We've got two great speakers coming up on screen, sharing insights of both the theory and the practice of how through good commercial management and aligning the whole project team as project professionals, we can reconcile the climate ambitions with the demands of project delivery. So I've got a few housekeeping logistics for the call. If we can keep microphones muted, please, to avoid any unintentional interruptions. We're going to be doing Q&A. There's going to be plenty of time for that, hopefully. But if you can drop those into the chat, what we're going to do is pick them up as we go along, and also after the presentations. So yeah, drop anything in the chat that you've got any questions regarding the presentations today. If we don't get time within the hour to answer them all, however, we are going to pick them up and we'll issue post-call a copy of the slides, the recording and answers to the Q&A. So they will all be made available to you. And they're also going to be available on the institution websites. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Chris Campbell. He is really the curator of today's session. He is CICES Deputy Chair. So thank you from me, Chris, for putting this session together. And Chris, over to you.
Great, thank you, Bernice, and welcome everybody. So this event has been arranged jointly by the ICE Yorkshire and Humber and Chartered Institute of Civil Engineering Surveyors Yorkshire Regions. It's in the context of our drive to decarbonise the built environment and particularly new transport infrastructure. This event aims to explore one way in which alignment of the whole project team can be created and reinforced through proactive and considered commercial management. Specifically, we're looking at the NEC secondary option clause X29, which was developed to help drive the achievement of net zero greenhouse gas emissions and other related climate change and biodiversity targets within our projects. We're fortunate to have two very knowledgeable speakers today. Richard Patterson is a procurement specialist at Mott MacDonald and a recognised expert in the NEC contract. He was part of the NEC4 drafting team for clause X29, and he's going to share with us his insights into the operation of the clause, focusing on the theory. And then Nikolaus, senior commercial manager at Cementation Skanska, is going to share his experience and learning, having pioneered the adoption of the X29 clause to deliver specialist geotechnical works on a major highways project in the east of England, which is live in construction right now. He's going to share some of his experience, having trialled the clause in practice. As Bernice said, we're going to try and make the most of our time today, so please stay on mute, and any questions, drop them in the chat function. Time permitting, Richard and Nick will address these during or at the end of their presentations, and if we run out of time, we will address and collate and circulate answers. So that's me, and we're straight over to Richard.
Okay, cool. Let me do the old share the screen stuff. See if I can get the right thing showing on here. Hopefully you've got my slides as we go here from current slide. Is that working, or have you got the wrong presentation there? Is that okay?
You're not in presentation mode.
Okay, tell you what, let's go for another one. Stop sharing. Sorry about that. I've got double screen stuff. Let's go for that one. Is that better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, all right then. Let's go through, and I'm going to move it very swiftly along. This thing is not complicated, I don't think, but that's easy for me to say. We'll see whether you think that's true or not. We have to put that in. Don't worry about it for now. That's me. I've been with Mott MacDonald since I was a small child. And as was mentioned, the reason I'm here today is because I'm an NEC nerd and because I was part of the team that developed this thing called X29, which means I'm particularly passionate about it. That's the X29, but it's possibly a different X29. Don't worry, you are on the right presentation. So firstly, can NEC contracts save the world? Now, slight bit of dynamism here. I think the reason X29 is called climate change, as we'll see, it can help with climate change, but it can do an awful lot more than that. But it was basically the title is there because NEC wanted to be seen to be a contract that was helping people with climate change, because NEC, like you and me, is keen to save the world. Alongside saving the world, there's this thing here called PAS 2080, which all of you know about in depth, I'm sure. This is the this is a standard, a publicly available standard. It's PAS, publicly available standard, about managing carbon in buildings and infrastructure. Now, I'm proud to say that colleagues of mine, Maria Manidaki, may be on the call today, I don't know, she led the development of PAS 2080 from a team led by Mott MacDonald as well. The history of this thing is probably too much detail, you don't really need to know now. It started out as a carbon group with ICE, and it morphed into a group developing the clauses, which was published in draft April 2 years ago now, and now published as a document published by NEC. Now, the slides that we'll send out here, as you can see, if you ever want to, should be able to get direct to these documents from this slide. It's only 3 pages, okay? So it's not complicated. You just need to go and read the thing, and then the guidance, as in all guidance, is longer than the contract itself. Okay, let's carry on. Why is that not going? Come on, talk to me. There we go. Okay, fundamentally, there's 2 things I want to tell you about. One is climate change requirements. The other one is the performance table. And guess what? We'll do them in that order. Climate change requirements. But all the contract says is that the client is prompted to include climate change requirements, got capital letters. It's a defined term. You can put them in the scope. Now, that hasn't changed anything. You could have done that without any fancy contract. We could have just done that at any time. But NEC now tells us, or in hints to the contractor, to the client, sorry, they can include climate change requirements in the scope. And that's what it says. That's one simple sentence, which you've already read. It's possible that you might get some more climate change requirements into the other scope, the scope provided by the contractor for its design at the bid stage, but I guess that's probably fairly unlikely. And NEC in the guidance notes suggests the sort of things that clients might like to be talking about in those client change requirements. Simplistically, the scope could say, can you use low energy light bulbs? But we could do that anyway. That's nothing fancy. That's nothing special. A reminder from NEC to be careful about putting undue risk on a contractor. And if those requirements are unrealistic or unattainable, you'll get either ridiculous prices from your bidders, or in extreme cases, they just won't bid at all. Now, because those climate change requirements are in the scope, if they relate to the works, now those of you that know your NEC will know that the works is basically the permanent works. That's the thing that's left behind. So if the work says use low energy light bulbs and the contractor puts in a high energy light bulb by mistake, that will be a defect because it's not in accordance with the scope. The contractor, NEC standard, is required to correct that defect. There's an option for agreement to accept the defect. And if the contractor doesn't correct the defect or get it accepted, the PM, it says there can, probably shouldn't be can, the PM is required to step in and assess the cost of having that defect corrected, and excuse me, the contractor pays. Absolutely standard NEC stuff. One thing to be aware of, if that climate change requirement actually relates to not the works, but to how the contractor provides the works, non-compliance will not be a defect, but the PM can stop the job. The PM, excuse me, the PM can say, look, you're not doing this in accordance with my scope. I'm going to stop this part of the scope until you sort it out. And that will not be, will be a compensation event, but the way the contract is written, the contractor won't get any money for that event because it was their fault. So very simple provisions for climate change requirements. Just to be sort of complete, I've added a slide here where that term is used in X29. So we've also got a thing called climate change partners, defined term. If you know your climate change, people will tell you that it's not a one-person thing. There are likely to be other people involved. So again, the client is asked to think about whether or not there are other climate change partners who are going to be contributing to this. And then simple clause requiring the contractor to collaborate with those climate change partners as stated in the climate change requirements. Again, so this is prompting you when you're writing your scope to address these issues. There's also a document called the Climate Change Plan in the contract. Now, the Climate Change Plan is a contractor document, and it's very low key. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but it's just an obligation to make sure that somebody in the contractor's side is writing this document to show how the contractor plans to meet the climate change requirements. It's a little bit like a program in the sense that the program shows how the contractor is going to do the whole job. The climate change plan shows how the contractor is going to meet these climate change requirements. Very simple. Hang on a minute. Let's see if my slides are going to move forward. Come on, talk to me. There's also, the lawyers got this one bit. We had one lawyer on our team, talked about disclosing. So one of the things that NEC thought would be good for clients to disclose how they're getting on with all this stuff. And there's a prompt in there to require people to disclose as stated, again, in the climate change requirements. Remember, the climate change requirements is in the scope. This climate change plan, again, the words for it, shows how the contractor meets the requirements. You can, like the programme, you can have it submitted by the bidder, pointed to from contractor part 2, so it's already there when we sign up. Or, like the programme, you can require it to be submitted within a certain period of the contract date. The contract says it's revised whenever the PM instructs or whenever the contractor chooses. The PM's got 2 weeks for accepting or stating reasons for not accepting. And it's not included within the compensation payment process. In summary, it's a really light touch. Again, I would say the only real function of this document is to make sure there's somebody writing it from the contractor's side who gives a monkeys about the climate change requirements. That's all very dull. The exciting bit is the performance table. Now, I still remember sitting down when we first started drafting this, because basically we were stealing the clauses from the NEC Alliance contract, which also has a performance table. One thing I should have said right at the start, which I haven't said yet, NEC has published versions of X29 for all of the big contracts, not the short contracts, but the big ones. What I'm focusing on here is how it fits into the engineering and construction contract. So this thing called a performance table. Those of you that know NEC will know that we've already got two options. X17 allows for negative performance damages for missing targets. X20 allows for positive payments for beating targets. So they're already there. They've been in NEC for 30 years. Ultimately, because of this performance table, X17, we talk about damages. X20, we talk about bonuses. I must admit, I have changed this because there was a version of my slides when I called these slaps and tickles, but people told me that wasn't appropriate for a professional training course. So we'll stick with damages and bonuses. So the performance table, what does it look like? Firstly, we've got a column for the subject, the target, and the key thing about the target is that you'll need to have defined measurement rules for how we're going to measure this particular target. Units, when are we going to measure this target? And then critically, how much is the contractor going to pay if we don't meet the target? And then we have a limit on the amount to be paid for this particular key KPI. So this is a row in the performance table. And you see our team quite rightly recognise that the contractor is going to need to have some limit on the liability to pay out for not meeting these particular targets. But then in the same table, You can have the tickle, you can have the well done, Mr. Contractor, you've beaten the target, you can have some extra money, which is the same as X20 key performance indicators. And again, there's a limit on the amount of money we're going to pay. Well, again, I say there's a limit. I should really say there's an option for the client to put in a limit. Remember, you're the client, you're writing this document. It's up to you to choose which things you want to incentivise, and it's up to you to choose the bonuses and or the damages for not meeting the targets that have been stated. Okay, so very simple table. There's also in that table a limit, a space to put in a limit on the overall amounts, plus or minus, within the performance table to limit the contractor's overall liability. Those targets, they could be set directly by the client, or in some cases, they might be offered by the bidder. If they're offered by the bidder, then we could include those offers within our tender evaluation process. Talk about that a little bit more later. The performance table itself is included in the contract data. And again, those of you that know NEC will know that the contract data part 2 is where we have anything coming back from the bidder. So if there are any entries required from the bidder, we will hang that document from contract data part 2. Otherwise, it will go straight into part 1. So again, these are the words from X29. The contractor has to give us reports on the performance provided at the interval stated in the contract, in the performance table, sorry. And that's the key clause. That's the damages and the bonuses for either missing or beating the targets. Very simple. We like to think that we followed the NEC rules of clarity, simplicity, flexibility, and stimulus to good management. There's also a line which says, critically, information in the performance table is not scope. That's quite important, because if it was scope as well and the contractor doesn't do it, then it would be a defect and we'd be basically penalising twice. So this is only a commercial table for paying more or taking money away if the contractor does better or less well than the targets. There's also a line in there, X2913, if we are using X18, which is total limit on liability, then the total limit on liability excludes amounts paid under the performance table. Again, linking back to what we said 5 minutes ago, that's why we do need a specific limit on the amounts in the performance table, which is set out directly in the performance table. I'm hoping this is making some sense. So, radically, okay, I'm a civil engineer, I have been for some time. We all think normally about project cost. How often, ask yourself, have you really gone out to tender and thought about whole life cost? The best example here I use every time in training courses is contracts I've got at the moment in Bangladesh for a mega water treatment plant. Yes, the client's interested in the cost, but the client's also interested in how much power and chemicals that is going to use for the next 30 years. So what we can do is get the bidder to give us a target for the power consumption and the chemical consumption. Those targets can be applied to the cost of power, the cost of chemicals, and effectively build up a whole life cost of the bid. And then you can include in the performance table damages and or bonuses for the contractor to commercially incentivize the contractor to make sure that when they build the thing, its power consumption is as they guaranteed. Hopefully that's a decent example of using a contract to deliver whole life performance. And guess what? We wrote a little article about that, specifically about using X29 for whole life cost. Take that one away. Now the big question, can we set targets for carbon? Can we measure it? And if we do measure it, have we yet got to a stage in our industry when clients are actually going to give contractors a benefit for promising to use less carbon? I don't know. What I do know is that every single government department in the UK has a carbon budget. And therefore, this contract is now giving them an opportunity to enforce those budgets in their contracts. Now, there is a thing called the Built Environment Carbon Database, which has only come out very, very recently, trying to build up a database of carbon measurements. And I'll be honest, there are other people doing this around the world. Don't forget, this is NEC, I'm talking to you from the UK, but everything NEC is being used internationally. And all around the world, people are struggling with this concept of measuring and enforcing carbon production or carbon usage. So BCIS is one of the organisations which is promoting this Built Environment Carbon Database. And again, proudly, MacDonald, first company to provide some data into that database. If we can do it, I would hope that other consultants and other contractors will be doing the same. Going back to what I said earlier about sharing our information. So everything we said so far is all about NEC X29 climate change, but we can set targets for anything. Has anybody out there ever heard of this new trendy term, social value? Trying to encourage contractors to do the right thing in their environment, in their either environmental things and or more social things. You know, the contractors required to employ apprentices, ... Well, if you want to, you can build that into your performance table. The same thing goes for, again, I was new and excited with this. I did a session with our specialist on biodiversity net gain. The government has set up a measurement tool for measuring biodiversity net gain. If you can measure it, you can incentivise it. If you want to. If you want to, stick it in that performance table. And guess what? Because we like writing articles, there's a little article there with the MacDonald specialist on social value, how you can use X29 to incentivise social value. And guess what? There's an article there on how you can incentivise biodiversity net gain, all with NEC's nice little simple tool, X29, with its performance table. Question for you, where am I going to put my requirements? We've given these two boxes, climate change requirements or performance table. What you probably know, if you know NEC, is that because the climate change requirements are in the scope, then the project manager, the all-powerful project manager, has the ability to change the scope at any time, and therefore the PM can change the climate change requirements. That will obviously be a compensation event, but there's no direct commercial incentive to do these climate change requirements. And as I mentioned, we can only police them in terms of defects if they relate directly to the final product, the works. In contrast, if we put our requirements in the performance table, we can choose to, we don't have to. One thing I didn't say earlier, it's perfectly plausible for the client to use the performance table just to gather data. We don't have to have the bonuses and or the damages. We can do, that's your choice as a client. That performance table can only be changed through compensation events, or it could be changed by an addendum between the parties. What comes first? I think when I've been working with clients using X29, logically, the first thing would be to think about the performance table. I would suggest, is it important enough to put it in the performance table? There's no point in putting it in there if it's not under the control of the contractor. And very importantly, particularly if we are putting financial bonuses and or damages against a target, we've got to make sure it's robustly measurable. That's where we're going to get into discussions later, I'm sure, when it comes to carbon. So as a client, if you're there sitting there thinking, what's this new sexy X29 about? Have a look at that slide. That's a starter slide for thinking about the sort of things that you might choose to include in your performance table. I'm not going to read them out. You've already read them. When it comes to structuring your performance table, again, this is just Richard Patterson thinking a little bit logically. Remember, some of these targets might be set by the client, some might be set and therefore offered by the contractor as part of their bid. Some of them might relate to the end works, and some of them might relate to how the contractor provides the works. So this is not right or wrong, it's just a framework trying to get you ways of thinking about what things we might be wanting to set targets for. And obviously, though that 4-box picture there, that can apply to each of the types of targets that was on the previous slide. Be careful about repeating stuff within the climate change requirements and in the performance table, as I mentioned, because we'll end up doubling things up. So I think we've got to be careful when we're writing the document. And just to let you know, NEC has got a fairly active working group trying to help the world with X29. There's a contact there, my friend Francesco at NEC. If you're interested, please get in touch with him. And that's it. Really, that's it. It's not difficult. The question I'm putting out there, this is what I put out to my colleagues in Mott MacDonald. You know, in Mott MacDonald, we've got people doing all this stuff. We've got climate change people, we've got carbon people. The fascinating thing about NEC is trying to integrate the procurement aspects with all these people trying to do good things. That's the challenge that we've got. One more article, one we did earlier on in the day, specifically about using procurement and X29 to drive climate change. And that's it from me. And I think I'm reasonably on time. Okay.
Thank you, Richard. That was great. There's no questions in the chat so far. So, yeah, those listening, you're welcome to...
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I was wondering, before we move on to Nick, you mentioned the working group that's collecting case studies. Have you got any initial data about the level of adoption?
A good question. I can't give you any serious data. The only thing I can tell you, as we found, my friend Veronica Fred-Williams, who's the NEC nerd within the Environment Agency, she was also part of that 4-person team that put this together, and she's taken X29 into the Environment Agency. And unsurprisingly, you would think logically, the Environment Agency would probably be the first client to start trying to take this seriously. So I have heard from her that they are building in these sorts of things into their frameworks and into their routine way of doing things. But the challenge is to make this business as usual, as they say. One of my lines, which I haven't said yet, which I'll share with you now, I think in maybe 5, maybe 10 years' time, the people out there will joke about it. They'll say, do you remember the bad old days when we had construction contracts without targets for carbon? Can you believe that? They used to just do stuff without even thinking about carbon. It was outrageous back then in the 2020s. I wonder, are things going to change?
Thank you. There's a few questions coming through thick and fast now, so I'll select a couple and then...
Yeah, please.
If they're similar, I'll try and group them together. So could you clarify whether X29 capped liability falls outside the X18 total liability? Is X18 total liability an aggregate liability?
Okay, really good question. The answer is the X20 liability is excluded from the total liability. So the contractor's got to put the two together in terms of overall liability. Does that make sense? You've still got my screen. I can probably find the words. Or maybe not. That's too hard. I won't try and do that. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, that's addressed the question. Do damages have to be a genuine pre-estimate of the loss?
Oh, lovely question. Okay, hands up. I'm not a lawyer. In the law has changed a couple of years ago. We used to get trained that every damage had to be a genuine pre-estimate. The law has now changed to say that every damage has to be not ridiculous, basically. They didn't use quite those words. But I would suggest that it makes a lot of sense for clients to have something on file as to how they've come about setting those damages. But again, the challenge there, a really, really, really good question. if you are going to have the contractor for using more carbon than they promised, how much are you going to charge them? How much is it worth to not pollute the planet with more carbon? I don't know. It's too hard. But you're going to make sure that that number is not so stupid. You want that number to be enough to incentivize the right behaviors, but you don't want it to be so much that it makes the project unbiddable for the contractor.
Understood. Thank you.
I think I half answered the question.
That's fine. A question about whole life costs. Have you considered how does this work in practice when these are long-term measurements, and if damages and incentives are used, is it assessed periodically or assessed on a forecast?
No. To be clear, you can do anything you like with words and contracts, but what I said in our little article, the idea of tying in the contractor subset of whole life costs that you can actually measure at the end of construction. So the best example by far is that guaranteed power consumption that you can test. And if we test it and it's now giving more, if it's using more than you promised, then you've got the right to impose the damage. And your damage will be calculated based on the additional cost to you of using more power, with a net present value of doing that over 30-year design life, for example. Have a read of the article that I've shared there.
Great, thank you. Nice, straight to the point question here. Does it cost more for a client to use X29?
A good question. Well, obviously you're going to have to spend a little bit of time internally to set it up. And if you are putting potential penalties on a contractor, I don't think we can argue. The contractor will have to price into their bid the risk of having to pay those penalties. So if you start putting such penalties on a contractor, yes, the price will go up. Can't get away from it. Nikolaus I think you'll agree with that. That's just the way the world is, isn't it? On the other hand, if we decide to incentivize positively, then the opposite will be the case, because the bids will come down, because the contractor will include in their bid price for the possibility, the future net present expected bonus they're going to get. And that's another really good thing. Sorry, there's too many things to talk about. I mustn't stop and take too much time. Nikolaus has got some stuff to come. But there's plenty of stuff out there in the literature suggesting that contractors, wait for it, are like teenagers. Contractors relate better to positive incentives than they do to negative incentives. Some of you on this call will have teenagers, will know what I'm talking about. So there's a lot to be said for putting in positive incentives rather than negative incentives. Again, NEC, in true NEC fashion, it gives you flexibility. But NEC can just put these words on the table. NEC can't tell you guys how to use it and how to think. That's why we're on this call today.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Richard. I'm going to wrap it up there for the moment. Keep the questions coming through, and we'll keep an eye on that and use any time we have left at the end. But thank you, Richard. Over to Nick to talk about the practice.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Richard, and good afternoon, everyone. So now that Richard shared a valuable insight into the theory, I'm here to talk to you about X29 in practice and how we, as Seven Tate and Skanska, have applied it to our project, the A428. Thankfully, there are recurring themes between what Richard has just said and some of the questions in the thread. So hopefully this should be fairly insightful. In terms of agenda, I'll provide a brief introduction into me and the project, and then I'll dive into how we developed and incorporated X29 into the conditions of our subcontract. I'll then touch upon which areas and why we as a business targeted to include these under the secondary option. I've got a bit of a visual representation of the data as well and the reporting output that we've produced, which is hopefully of interest. I've then got some direct feedback from the project team responsible for managing and administering X29. So I'll share some of their learned experience thus far, and then I'll touch on some of our aspirations for the use of X29 moving forward, which will hopefully bring us to a close. As Richard and Chris have touched upon, put as many questions into the chat directly in relation to the content, and I'll endeavour to answer these as quickly as I can. But if we don't get to them, then we'll circulate responses after the call. So a bit about me. So my name's Nikolaus and I'm a Senior Commercial Manager for Cementation Skanska. And throughout the 14 years I've been at Skanska, I've had the opportunity to contribute to a wide variety of projects and sectors. Projects such as High Speed 2 and Crossrail, critical national infrastructure projects in the highways and rail sectors, and also regulatory utility frameworks in the water, gas and electricity markets. And I've now been working with Cementation for the past 2 years, focusing on all of our internal piling opportunities across the UK business unit, and also all steel fabrication opportunities nationwide. And with my diverse background, it's allowed me to bring a different perspective to the projects in our sector. And ultimately, I've learned quite a lot about piling. Coinciding with the topic of this presentation, I am an accredited NEC4 ECC PM and have a passion for delivering better outcomes in collaboration with our customers. And with regards to X29, I initially learned of this new secondary option through my PM training back in early 2022, so when it was at inception stage. And then in similar fashion to today, I actually attended a bite-sized presentation hosted by Richard. And fortunately enough for me, our client was on that presentation also. And from that point, we essentially commit to try and develop X29 for use on the works where we're delivering on the A428. With regards to the project, the A428 is part of the National Highways Regional Delivery Partnership Programme and upgrades the route between the existing Black Cat roundabout at St Neots and Caxton Gibbet, which is towards Cambridge. As part of the scheme, it involves the construction of a new 10-mile dual carriageway, new junctions and bridges, and the scheme revenue to Skanska Infrastructure is around 679 million. The client for the scheme is National Highways, and the main contractor is Skanska Infrastructure, who are engaged via an ECC option C. We as Skanska Cementation are engaged under the NEC4 Engineering and Construction Subcontract option C to Skanska Infrastructure, and we're delivering all of the board piling, ground improvement and associated tested scope. And our revenue comes in at around about 26 million. In the months leading up to the award of our subcontracts, like I said, we worked really closely with the contractor to step down the main contract conditions into our subcontract. This integrated and collaborative arrangement was developed primarily for the subcontract to achieve the main project outcome set by the customer. It was also developed to align risk and opportunity to capability, not simply just to transfer risk through the supply chain. And some of you may be aware of this approach is more commonly described as an enterprise model by the Project 13 community. Enterprise models for us are essentially underpinned by long-term relationships. Rewards and incentives under the model are based on value to the overall customer outcomes delivered. So by means of example, on the A428, we are collectively incentivised on the ultimate customer needs, which are aligned to journey time reliability, programme critical structures and value for money. And value for money being the pressing topic that it is, it's calculated via DFT's benefit cost ratio, which is a scientific calculation, but quite simply means for every £1 spent on the project needs to deliver £1.60 worth of benefit. This has been a fairly radical shift in terms of the commercial model and challenging the status quo. And to give you an example of the shift, we've actually ended up with a form of subcontract that has no compensation events with it. Unless, and there is always an unless, it's a fundamental change. So to give you some context, a whole new road gets introduced into the scope, and that generates an entitlement of our ultimate customer. Thus far, this alignment has essentially dramatically limited the transactional nature that traditional subcontracting brings about, and it's greatly enhanced collaboration between the respective teams, all benefits which foster better long-term relationships. Now I'm going to talk about how we went about preparing and developing the climate change requirements, the climate change plan, and the performance table in collaboration with the contractor. As touched on earlier, conversations surrounding the inclusion of X29 happened really early on, and we also held frequent collaborative workshops in order to develop it into something that we could include in the subcontract. At this point, it's really important to note that although we have a truly back-to-back approach to the main contract, X29 was unfortunately not included in the main contract between National Highways and Skanska Infrastructure. So what that meant for us is that it essentially had its limitations as to the extent of how we could fully deploy X29, which I'll explain further when I talk about the performance table. However, in agreement with the contractor, we deemed this to be a positive inclusion to the back-to-back approach, and ultimately it meant that we would need to collectively work together to consider how we could make it perform. We achieved this primarily through advising the contractor that the outputs we could capture and achieve. So in essence, you could argue, and touching on what Richard's already said, we started back to front with X29 and developed the climate change plan and the performance table in order to inform the climate change requirements. The specific contents of the requirements and plan are touched on later in the slides, but to give you a flavour, we specifically targeted data capture around hotspots, which are our elements of the works that have the greatest impact on environment. As a result of limiting the climate change requirements as to how we provide the works, so for example, capturing the data on hotspots, we removed our exposure to defects beyond the back-to-back subcontract terms. And it's important to note that we intentionally kept the climate change requirements really simple and avoided any unduly onerous requirements, as again, this essentially had the potential to introduce risk beyond the confines of the scope and the back-to-back conditions. And to further support the visibility and the administration of X29, again, as Richard's already touched upon, we supported the contractor with drafting and capturing the climate change requirements in the scope. As for the plan, it really is, as Richard's already said, a mirror image of the climate change requirements, and it lists out the timescales, tools, stakeholders and tasks for achieving the climate change requirements. And in simple terms, it's our we will do in response to the contractor's you will. As touched upon in the slides, we captured the climate change plan as an appendix to the subcontract, and it's referenced within the subcontract data at the contract date. With regards to the performance table, we were unable to deploy the mechanisms to their full potential. So we weren't able to introduce any financial incentive or penalty, as it would essentially result in a deviation from our back-to-back main contract approach. Nonetheless, we did work closely with the contractor to identify requirements and opportunities within the climate change plan, which supported a drive towards cost reduction. So, for example, the supply of free issue HVO fuel from the contractor in an instance where we were unable to provide it. In essence, we've used the performance table to measure outputs of our performance against a baseline and to record and report on that performance level achieved against a target. The performance table has been listed in Subcontract Data Part 2 and attached as an appendix alongside the climate change plan. And to reiterate Richard's earlier point, the performance table is not scope, meaning it can't be changed unilaterally by the PM as described in X29.12, and it won't result in a defect that has to be corrected if not achieved. An important point to note here, though, is that throughout the development of the performance table, we did ensure that subjective judgments, so for example, phrases such as like reasonable satisfaction, etc., were avoided. We therefore applied the method of measuring objective performance against the target, which was the use of really simple language, and it was clearly stated. And another top tip we learned from developing the performance table was essentially the simplification and streamlining of the reporting intervals to be the same for all items within our performance table. And appreciating this will differ from project to project, but we felt it more efficient for the output to be provided monthly in order to align with our routine reporting periods. Another element to note is that some of the targets specified in our performance table are actually stretch targets beyond the requirements stated in the climate change requirements. And this was really intentional as it essentially geared our emphasis towards outperformance. So now I'm going to touch on the data and reporting for the A428 and more specifically the hotspots that we have focused on for capturing our data and performance. So as touched on within previous slides on the performance table, we have in essence committed to measure, record and report on the performance table and the performance achieved against the relevant focus areas. And for those who aren't cognizant with piling, it's understood that over 50% of our embodied carbon derives from steel and concrete products. We therefore focused our attention on measuring the volumes of steel reinforcement and concrete and the associated embodied carbon within the materials used on our project against tendered volumes and carbon baselines that we'd produced. We then focused our attention on the percentage of HVO fuel used on equipment, as again, for those of you that aren't aware, HVO is a fossil-free diesel, which has a severely lower impact on climate compared to normal diesel products. And we then committed to using Euro Stage 4 engines or above on all of our non-road mobile machinery, or NRMM, to those of you that are familiar. And this essentially includes all our plants, such as the piling rigs, excavators, dumpers. We chose Stage 4 as most NRMM low emission zone sites have to log all their machinery and are required to meet this minimum standard. And the only exception to the rule is that it can be demonstrated that Stage 4 equipment isn't available, or it must be demonstrated by other technical means, which I won't profess to know the ins and outs of at this stage. But in essence, what we've done is we've created a target in the performance table that specifically puts a focus on any equipment that cannot achieve the levels required, so that we can use this to learn which machines in the industry may require development to meet the standards. So taking a further step back, why did we opt for this approach? The first point to make, I suppose, is that our form of subcontract only encompasses the construction phase. In an ideal world, and in the example of a design and build or a two-stage approach, we would want to target the inclusion of X29 that gives us the ability to track the developments and outputs from the inception of design. In normal two-stage contracts or design and build, the emphasis historically has been on cost. And from what we've seen thus far, X29 really brings focus and attention to capturing the impact on climate and carbon, which we really value as an organisation. Furthermore, we have the capability within Skanska cementation to capture a carbon baseline at any given level of design maturity. Through our estimating and carbon management systems, we can produce carbon baselines and revisions as the design progress. So this is something that we aspire to set out in the not too distant future on upcoming projects. As touched on previously, we've targeted these areas as they present the largest impact and opportunity to reduce our impact on climate. Again, by capturing the data, it gives us the confidence to propose performance targets in the future to develop solutions which reduce our embodied carbon. In addition to this, with mandating EV first on our commercial fleet is essentially a flow down of a commitment from our group strategy. So it's a further checkpoint for us to ensure that we deliver on our commitments to customer. The fundamental reason we've tried to capture some wide spanning areas within our requirements and plan is to develop our understanding of and application of accurately capturing the data, which I'll talk about later on within the learned experience slides. As a commercial person, I would be fooling myself if I wasn't interested in understanding the cost of climate change and also the costs associated with managing and administering this option, which I'll talk about later. So records. It's essentially a sentence that is never more prevalent than this secondary option. And as shown in the list on screen, there are a wide array of data sources linked to all of the climate change requirements we've listed in our subcontract. This data not only requires collation from a number of people in our project team, but ratification and conversion to the units of measurement specified in the performance table. Some of that data conversion factors may also need revision and regular update from our supply chain, such as environmental product declarations or EPDs for our steel and concrete suppliers in order for that data to be integral. These EPDs, as an example, support carbon emission reduction by making it possible for us to compare the impacts of different materials and products in order to select the most sustainable option. And this is particularly prevalent for us with pile mix types. Some of the other data capture methods require collaborative engagement and input from our internal stakeholders, which can take considerable time and effort to ensure the data is reliable and accurate. And then we take the raw data files that have been produced by the team, and we've developed a dashboard which visually represents the main findings of the data. So on your screen now is a bit of a snapshot. It's quite small, appreciate, but I mean, for me, it's more about what we're doing in practice here. So essentially, we've got a dashboard that we've developed for the contractor, and essentially it showcases our output of X29. And for me, it has been a really useful and powerful way of communicating the data. And to touch on quite simply again, the objective language used throughout the climate change requirements, the climate change plan and the performance table made the task of capturing the most poignant data quite simple. Again, the point of setting the stretch targets in the performance table beyond the level stated in the climate change requirements meant we had full confidence in sharing where we weren't quite meeting our performance. Again, this was all about learning and our medium and longer term carbon reduction journey. So, you know, we didn't see it as a criticism if we couldn't quite hit them. Not only has it been well received by our contractor, it's essentially fueled some fantastic conversations both internally and externally. And to give you an example, we've identified a challenge around the availability of pumps that meet the requirement of Euro Stage 4 engines. So this has resulted in our procurement and technical teams reaching out to our supply chain to determine if it's essentially just a gap in technology or a lack in available equipment. And to summarise, we really have seen a behavioural shift across the breadth and depth of the teams. And in particular, it's brought the implications to the fore of not being able to meet requirements. And obviously, with this being NEC, we're submitting it in accordance with the conditions of our subcontract, and it's communicated on CMAR in a form that can be read, copied and recorded, and the accompanying data files are shared to support the dashboard when we provide the submission. So how have we found it so far? I mean, I must make mention at this point, we have only been on site for 4 months. So the experiences learned are still whilst our application of X29 is in its infancy, but the project team applying this have had a number of experiences which they've kindly shared. And the fundamental piece of feedback from the team was that X29 has facilitated some really important discussions and increased widespread engagement across the project team, which includes our customer. We've been able to get some valuable insights from the data outputs. And to give you an example, it's enabled us to track our planned versus actual measures of carbon and steel, not only for environmental data, but to inform the robustness of our commercial offering we've committed to with a contractor. The outputs essentially have provided the team with an additional tool to scrutinise our data, which in turn improves the logic and integrity of our forecasting. Another point to mention here is that we learned really early on that it is vital to identify owners of each of the respective sections on the climate change plan. And this includes shared ownership, not only from us as a subcontractor, but from the contractor and the client side too. And this is where the real alignment to deliver better climate outcomes takes place. And the team have had some fantastic debate around changing, for example, concrete mixes in an attempt to reduce carbon. Data and data validation in any walk of life is critical and can't be underestimated the importance here. And the timely updating of that data must happen to give the full picture. The team learned really early on that we have a heavy reliance on manual input to meet the requirements and plan. So we are currently working on attempting to automate this data as far as practicable. But again, it still requires the validation. Some further experiences here, and one I'd like to single out is the output of the form and content. So this for us could have been more explicitly stated within the requirements and plan, but what it has resulted in is a tool that we can adopt and adapt for future opportunities. And if I could share one bit of advice, I think it would be to mock up a visual representation of the output as part of the development of X29 when including it in the proposals. And this preparedness would essentially negate the upfront output that the team experienced to develop the dashboard. Again, as the performance table isn't scope, it presents the ability to go and outperform the baseline included in the requirements. This decision point is fantastic, and for us, the decision was simple, as the aspiration was to outperform where we could. This drive towards outperformance has really fueled some collaborative conversations with our customer and supply chain to realise our objectives. And unfortunately, as a commercial person, I am going to talk about costs, and I've seen some questions in the thread. Yes, I think the answer is there is a cost to managing the climate change plan and working to meet the requirements. But what we are able to demonstrate is the value that this has in terms of a reduction in embodied carbon. This secondary option has ultimately lent itself towards a behavioural shift in focus towards TOTEX solutions as opposed to CapEx, which is really powerful when looking at the ultimate customer value for money objectives. And what I would say is that we don't have a dedicated person just administering the requirements of X29. What we've actually done is we've shared it across the relevant members of the team, which have the capability and capacity to manage and capture the process. So that's the experiences from the A4 to 8, but I thought I'd also touch on where we as a business are aspiring to get to with X29. So as mentioned throughout my presentation, we would seek to introduce X29 from inception, and for us to be engaged as early on in the project process as possible, as essentially it presents us with the greatest ability to develop a carbon focused design. This then lends itself to developing a solution with the best whole life cost, with the least impact on the environment. So we feel this is really powerful. We'll also look at using the performance table, as Richard's already touched on, to introduce social value targets. Again, the performance table is a really clear way of capturing measurable data, and far too often I've seen social value targets embedded in really long and subjective scope documents. The performance table essentially introduces the recognition to the need listed in the scope. Again, we'd definitely look to introduce the full functionality of the performance table moving forward. Appreciating this opportunity didn't enable it, but we most certainly are comfortable with the concept of applying its full functionality. And I'd touch on the flow down of requirements to our supply chain, and this one shouldn't be underestimated. We recognise that our supply chain are the area which can have the greatest impact on delivering lower carbon solutions, products, equipment or materials. So we would look to flow down and align X29 with our supply chain where possible, as this incentive essentially should drive innovation in products and materials. So to conclude, in my opinion, I think X29 is a fantastic catalyst by recognising and bringing the need of reducing our impact on climate to the fore. It's encouraged us as a business to commercially focus upon the integration of environmentally sustainable practices as business as usual, and self-stimulates innovative approaches to delivering outperformance. X29 certainly has the potential for long-term cost saving through sustainable resource management, but this really needs to flow down and be aligned from the customer all the way to our supply chain to drive the right behaviour. And it's a great tool for fostering collaborative and engaging conversations with a wide array of stakeholders. And contractually, it showcases our responsible project practices, which thus far we have only seen positive benefit from. And the final point I really want to stress, and I think Richard stressed it throughout his slides, is it needs to be kept simple. The minute you try to develop subjective or ambiguous commitments, it will drive the wrong behaviour. Start with what you realistically feel is possible and aspire to be better through the performance table. It doesn't have to be complex for it to be a success in our experience. And that's it. So hopefully I've managed to keep us to time. But before I hand back to Chris, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the ICE and CICES for arranging this session. And I hope that this presentation has given you all a bit of an insight into how X29 can be applied in practice. And if anyone wants to reach out to me to speak in any more detail, you can reach me on LinkedIn, or I'm happy to append my details with the presentations shared out to you all. And I'll now hand back to Chris to share a brief Q&A. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nick. Bernice is going to select a couple of questions with the time we've got left.
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes, Nick, but so we'll at least pick up one. So I've got one here. Did the data you obtained include some of the more business as usual areas to potentially target, e.g. defects, volume of TQs, plant idle time?
In short, no, because what we were really targeting was essentially where we could capture embodied carbon. So we really were keen on showcasing our capability to capture data, right from the point of producing our baseline carbon output, and then subsequently capturing that through construction. So what we were able to capture was, if there was a change in design, we would then be able to demonstrate the impact on carbon. So for us, it was all about essentially anything that had the greatest impact on carbon, as opposed to, idling and other elements.
Okay. And just linking back, I suppose, to one question that came in earlier regarding, in practice, the pros and cons. What would you say is the biggest pro from your perspective? I mean, you've covered some of it in the presentation. If you had to pick one thing, what's your biggest pro?
I think it's pushing the question through all strands of stakeholders in terms of how we deliver better carbon solutions. And like I say, it's fueled some really collaborative conversations, both with our, with the main contractor, with the customer, with our supply chain, about actually, we set ourselves these targets because we felt they were aspirational but achievable. And if we've had, areas where we've needed to sort of, go and improve on a specific area, or if we've had a challenge around obtaining availability on fuels, we've basically had real good buy-in and integration from all strands of stakeholders. And for me, I think, it just brings about the real conversations. It feels less transactional from the experience we've had thus far. And like I say, we've only been, on site 4 months and administered this for the last few months. So we're still seeing the benefits, but for me, I think it's all positive. I haven't really had many drawbacks today. Excellent.
Good to hear. Good to hear. So we're at time, so we need to wrap up. So Richard, Nick, thank you, and Chris as well. As we mentioned, the rest of any other questions that have been asked but we've not got to will be answered, and we'll put them on the website and will be shared with the recording link and the slides for today. Richard, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to say one thing. I'm passionate about this. I helped draft the thing. That's the first time I've heard somebody stand up and tell us it's actually working. So for me, that was a tears to my eyes moment. So thank you very much, Nicholas. Absolutely brilliant.
No problem.
And let's get the rest of the industry going there. And the thing is, again, what I didn't say, some clients might use this without putting the sticks and bonuses. Because what it does, exactly as you said, it encourages discussions about the right things. And as an industry, surely that's what we should be trying to do. So thank you very much for that presentation. Fantastic.
Right. Okay, Chris, anything to add and we should wrap up?
No, thank you. Thanks to the speakers. Thanks to everyone who's helped arranging it, and thanks to everyone for attending and giving us your attention, asking questions. We'll share the content, we'll share a recording, and we will endeavour to answer all your questions. Reach out to the speakers, reach out to the ICE or CICES regional committees to talk about this or future events that you want to see in the region. And thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.